This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. It's that time of the year. It's the combine, which means that the draft is officially around the corner and that we're entering not only draft season, but free agency season. And we know what usually kicks that off is the press conference at the combine. It's one of the more important offseason press conferences you're going to hear from both a coach and a general manager. Today, we're going over what Andrew Berry said, what we learned from his press conference at the not the Senior Bowl, the scouting combine, and how that's going to affect the Browns going forward and what that tells us about the Browns going forward. So I thought there was an interesting amount of information at this one. Like, usually Andrew Berry's tight-lipped at these things, but it seems like the longer he's here, the more comfortable he is with just talking to the media. I thought he was very comfortable today. We'll talk about that more, but let's get into it.
Andrew, is there anything you would report on the Nick Chubb situation? Progress in making it a real.
Yeah, it's a good.
Just so you guys know, it's really hard to hear the questions here in this feed that they have. What Tony Grossi just asked Andrew Berry is there any update with Nick Chubb's situation, when he'll be back, and the contract surrounding him? Andrew's going to give an answer here.
Question, Tony, and I understand that Nick is a popular discussion point. I meant when I said about him at the end of the season. Any conversations that we have with him or his reps, honestly, will stay between will stay between us. If anything were to change with the status, you guys would be the first to know when that does happen.
So basically a non-answer about Nick Chubb's contract situation is something that we expected. Browns are going to give a non-answer about this. But I do think there are some important things that he says about Nick Chubb as a player and as a person that kind of go above and beyond what he would be required to say in this kind of setting, that indicates to me that this is the organization and the team that's going to do everything possible to keep that player on the team.
Progress, how much do you have any update on where he is in that recovery?
Yeah, Chris, he's done a great job. Yeah, you guys know Nick. He works his tail off. He does everything in his power to make sure that he can recover as quickly as possible. It still is very early, and we're 6 months away from training camp. So to say anything more definitively than I did at in the middle of January, it would probably be inaccurate. Yeah, Mary Kay, that is accurate. Deshaun will begin throwing, next month. He's worked his tail off in terms of his rehab and recovery. He's in a really good place. We're excited, when the spring hits and we can get him back on the field. But he's making really good progress, and we're really excited to see that continue.
All right, so Deshaun throwing already, right, or getting ready to throw in a couple of weeks at the beginning of March is very important in big news, right? Because when a lot of people hear throwing surgery, they think of Cam Newton, they think of Ben Roethlisberger, they think of those Tommy John-esque type shoulder injuries that pretty much ruin a player's ability to throw a football at a high level, or at least at the same level, right? We saw that steep fall off after Cam's shoulder injury. We saw that steep fall off after Ben Roethlisberger's, I believe it was an elbow injury. It wasn't even a shoulder injury. Now, the important thing to note about the differences between the injuries that Deshaun Watson and Cam Newton had is that Deshaun Watson's injury at first, the first injury that he had to that throwing shoulder, was a rotator cuff micro tear. That healed. He came back from that injury. Then the injury that took him out for the year was a shoulder scapula fracture. So what took him out was a broken bone, not a torn muscle, which is important to remember, because when we talk about Cam Newton's injury and being concerned because of Cam Newton or Ben Roethlisberger style injury, we also have to remember that Cam Newton's injury happened in 2016 when he pretty much messed up his AC joint, not his rotator cuff, and he never really fully let himself heal from that. And that was what kind of went on for the rest of his career, was that AC joint. It's a muscle. Bone heals a little bit better than muscle. The fact that he's throwing right now is a good sign. And hopefully this means that there's not going to be super long lasting effects on him from this injury, because you always do have to be cautious when it comes to a throwing shoulder injury. I'm pretty sure Deshaun Watson and his camp are also going to be cautious when it comes to injury, especially a throwing shoulder injury, given how close Deshaun Watson is to Cam Newton, and they saw what happened to Cam. I'm pretty sure they're going to have the tendency to play it safe. And if you're the Browns, you don't want the fall off from Deshaun to be what it was for Cam, where he's borderline close to unplayable a couple of years after his prime. So you want to be cautious. You want to take these things cautiously. But the fact that they're at that point with that injury tells me that this does not look to be of the same thing. And remember, the injury that took him out was the bone break. And that is a little bit less concerning. Not more, but it's a little bit less concerning of an injury when it comes to recovery than it would have been if he had like completely tore his shoulder off the bone or something like that from his AC joint or his rotator cuff. That's a little bit more difficult to come back from. So it's an important distinction to make, and it's important that the Browns and Deshaun Watson, are cautious about it, but also it's really good to see that he's going to be out there throwing from a perspective of that injury not being something that's going to be career altering or alter his career more than it's already been.
So good question, Scott. I think where the salary cap landed, that was in the range of our projections. I can't say that we had the number pinpointed. I wouldn't say that it has a fundamental impact in terms of the in terms of our planning, but obviously there are more available dollars across the league, so that could impact markets accordingly as you think about free agency and extensions.
Yeah, that's another thing that we talked about earlier this week, a couple of weeks ago, when people were making all those videos and takes about the Browns cap situation and panicking about it. We had talked about on this channel that the Browns anticipate a cap jump every year, because the cap does jump up about 7-8%. This year it went up, I believe, 13%. So they anticipate a jump. They anticipate that it's going to go up. They know how to schedule out their cap room with that. I think Nathan Zegura and Andrew have a good conversation about this in another clip that I'm going to show you guys. But yeah, I think, when it comes to the salary cap stuff, you have to remember the Browns are not just planning 3 months ahead. They're planning 3 years ahead. And that's further confirmation of what we all believed watching this channel, that's how the Browns tend to operate with that. Shout out to Jarrett here. He got this question in here, which I think a lot of people are going to be interested in on his Twitter feed. So make sure you follow Jarrett K. Mueller on Twitter. He does really good stuff. So I'm snagging his video because I think the audio for the question is a little bit better here. And check out the question here.
To retain that trust.
Do you encourage him to?
Keep doing it.
Yeah, so good question, Mary Kay. We really just look at it, what's the best thing for the team, and how we think about, roles from that perspective. Kevin will have a good beat on that. Ultimately, that will be his decision, but we really will feel good whichever way it lands.
Yeah, so, they'll figure out whatever makes sense in the process, it sounds like, for play calling, but it's Kevin's decision ultimately what's done with that. I know there were some conspiracy theories out there that the decision was out of Kevin's hands. It's not. It's firmly in Kevin's hands here. If you were to believe everything that they put out there. Well, not everything, but that's pretty straightforward. I thought this was an interesting clip here. Andrew Berry proposes a bit of a rule change. And I think this rule change is definitely something interesting to listen to.
Year. Number 3, we wanted to retroactively correct the fact that the trade deadline never moved when the season expanded to 17 games. And then really number 4, if at some point in the future the regular season expands to 18 games, we wanted to be proactive in terms of the positioning for the trade deadline. One of the things that we found, Tony, or I'll touch on 2 parts. You're probably getting more than you bargained for here, but I'll touch on 2 parts here. If you look at us compared to the other major sports leagues, if you look at their seasons by like calendar days or games played, baseball and basketball, they have the trade deadline at when 65% of the games are played. Hockey's at 78%. Currently, we're at 45%. Wow. Our proposal would move it to about 55% of the games played.
All right, so he wants to pretty much move the trade deadline to what he feels like is a more reasonable point of the season. It does seem like the NFL trade deadline happens super early, and I think he's also working in there, or wants to work in there, a way to not only make sure that the trade deadline is not happening super early, but also to make sure that if it does change, if they do add games, that the trade deadline can continue to be something that is moved down the line.
Had that gone south, have a seat, buddy. Good to see you, AB. Yeah, hop in. We're here live on the program here. Boy, you're like a one-man news breaking machine over there. We got Greenbrier, we got the Vikings. I mean,
so 2 big things of news broke. The Browns will be returning to Greenbrier for the training camp. That's something we kind of expected. It was a thing that Deshaun Watson kind of pushed the team to do. It worked out well for them, so they're going to do it again. Another thing that might have caught you out of left field is that they're no longer joint practicing with the Eagles. They're going to switch to the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to do pretty much the same thing they did with the Eagles. 1 joint practice in Cleveland, 1 joint practice in Minnesota. This year, the joint practice is going to be in Berea. So next year, the one would be in Minnesota, so on and so forth. And they'll probably switch teams every couple of years just to keep things fresh, given that now they've been in the league long enough to have a ton of connections with a ton of guys across the league. And it makes sense with Kwesi being the GM over there in Minnesota that's who they connect with next. I think Andrew Berry also had a ton of Philadelphia ties. That's why they kind of did the training camp with the Eagles the last couple of years. So that's kind of explaining why that move is there. So one of the things that I think kind of gets misunderstood about how the Browns operate is that a lot of people assume that the Browns are only like a year ahead or maybe 3 months ahead about how they're planning these contracts, but they really do plan with multiple years in line, assuming that you're going to get multiple jumps in the salary cap. All of these things are things that the Browns anticipate and schedule contracts and have cap dumps kind of scheduled with that. So it's why I kind of stress you want to look at things in percentages, see what the cap should be that year before we really freak out about cap numbers. This is Andrew Berry talking about that.
We'll talk so that people understand, how far out are you looking numbers-wise as you're building this thing for now, but for 5 years, 10 years? How far do you go out?
Yeah, it's usually probably a 3-year window, honestly, because, and really even a 3-year I use loosely because it's just so your roster is so noisy. Like, I don't think people truly appreciate how much turnover there is in the league from year to year, and then just how your assumptions on players may change, especially as it relates to their costs in a given year. Not to mention how positional market shifts, obviously like player costs around the league, which drives the cap. You know, that may change. Your assumptions may change from year to year on that, but it's usually with a 3-year window on that.
Okay. What'd you think of the cap number this year?
It's good, right? Higher is better.
It's a win.
Well, I think also when you are a team that is I'm sure you guys are modeling this out, and you're saying, okay, maybe we're able to. The dollars we're paying today actually aren't going to be the same dollars in 2 years as you get the inflation of the cap, and when you get a nice hit like that, it probably helps that.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, Nate.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so that's pretty much how the Browns like to go about it. My overall thoughts about his press conference is that Andrew's gotten a lot more comfortable at doing these things. He like jokes around more. He's seems to be more comfortable being himself on these press conferences. And he sounds a lot more confident. So it seems like he's comfortable in his job. He's comfortable in his role, which is important to look at because he's technically going into a contract year. But I expect both him and Kevin Stefanski to get extended before the season starts. And I think just his demeanor in general, the planning that he's doing, it all screams that he's probably going to get an extension here. But that was Andrew Berry's combine press conference. What did you think about it? Was there anything that you wish you could have found out more about? Or is there stuff that you found out in this press conference that you thought was interesting and not enough people talked about? Let me know in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.